this video, I'm going to explain how I use a foreign-owned US LLC as my business structure to legally pay 0% tax while living around the world. Now, I talk about this on quite a few videos on this channel, but there's always a lot of misconceptions that people have about this business structure. And there's also a lot of new updates, new things that I haven't mentioned about running a US LLC as a foreigner that you absolutely should be aware of. So I wanted to make this 2025 updated video to first of all update you on whether I still think that this is the best business structure for someone to open if you're living, let's say, a digital nomad lifestyle or living around the world, and what are the things that I haven't mentioned before that you absolutely should be aware of if you're looking to run a US LLC as a non-US resident. And if this is the first time you're hearing about this structure, then it might surprise you from someone like me to talk about running a US LLC, especially given how sort of anti-West, as I've made clear in a lot of my videos, I don't have any interest in living in any Western country. So it might surprise you to hear that I use a Western business structure, specifically the US LLC, from a country like the US that has very, very high taxes. So I'm also going to recap exactly how I use this business structure to legally pay 0% tax on all of my income. Now, just as an overview, the US has quite a few different business structures. The most popular ones are what I call a C corporation and the LLC, so a limited liability company. Now, I use an LLC, and for this structure to work, you specifically want to pick the LLC, not the C corporation. The C corporation has different purposes. Basically, that you're in the US and you're running like a full-on business, especially a business where you're looking to get venture capital investment at some point in the future, and you want to be hiring a lot of people and things like that, then a C corporation is much more suited for that kind of person. But for someone who's running, let's say, a one-person business or a two-person business, like a very small business where you're not ever looking to get funding or anything like that, then the LLC is usually the business structure that you would choose for that purpose. And also in general, if you want lighter reporting, lower taxes, and sort of easier administration, then the LLC is the structure to go for. Now, the interesting thing about the US LLC is that it is a structure that's not found in too many places around the world. In that it's kind of a company, but it's also kind of not a company at the same time, because as you probably know, most companies, they are entirely separate legal entities, meaning that all the income they make are taxed separately using corporate tax rates. Now, the LLC is different in the sense that in the US, the LLC, for taxation purposes and for like income purposes, it is not treated as a separate entity, aka any income that the US LLC makes sort of automatically flows through the LLC into the owner's tax return. So you can imagine the LLC as sort of like a cup that doesn't have a bottom, where all the income that goes through it automatically just flows through it to whoever is below it, aka who owns it. Now, for legal purposes, it is still a separate entity, aka it still has the legal protection and everything like that. It is a legit business for every other purpose except for the taxation. And this is exactly the tax sort of loophole that especially foreigners who are not based in the US can use to actually not have to pay any taxes. Because what happens when you imagine that the owner of the US LLC is not tax resident in the US? Well, the US doesn't tax that income at all because it is not taxed at the US LLC level, and it is not going to be taxed by the US at the owner level because the owner is not resident, i.e. not taxable in the United States. And this is precisely how so many people around the world use the US LLC structure to not have to pay any taxes. Now, there's more complications to this. It is not quite as simple as that, and we'll cover that in just a moment. But first, a few misconceptions around how all of this works. The number one and the biggest misconception people have is that the US LLC is not going to have to pay tax anywhere. And this is false in most cases. It doesn't have to pay tax in the US, but the thing about the LLC structure is that in US law, it is treated kind of differently to a C corporation, to a different kind of company. But in foreign law, so let's say you're running this US LLC from the UAE or from Singapore or from Indonesia or wherever you live, other laws don't have this separate pass-through entity in their law. Like you can read through the UAE corporate tax law, for example, which I have done many times. There is no separate entity for a pass-through entity or something like that. The US LLC for UAE law purposes will simply be treated as a company like any other. So what does this mean? Well, if you run this company, aka you manage and control this company from a different country, then most likely by that country's corporate tax law, that US LLC is going to be taxable in that country, because most countries don't just tax companies that are registered there, they tax all companies that are managed and controlled, aka operated from that country. So even though my US LLC doesn't have to pay tax in the US, it would have to pay tax in the UAE, except UAE has 0% corporate tax for any company that makes less than $816,000 US a year in revenue, aka all the businesses that qualify for small business exemption. So still, I actually get 0% tax legally. So the US LLC is great because it allows you to only worry about the taxes of the place where you actually live. The other way to legally pay 0% tax using a US LLC is to be what we call a digital nomad, where you, let's say, divide up your time between Thailand and Bali and Brazil, for example, where you don't really become tax resident in any particular place. And because the US will not tax the US LLC and no other country will tax it, now you get 0% tax. The second misconception is that you would have dividend tax when you pay yourself from this company, because the US is going to have a, by default, 30% withholding tax on all dividends that are paid by US companies to residents elsewhere that are not US tax residents, unless there is a tax treaty that mitigates this. And this is not the case, because again, for US tax purposes, this US LLC is not a corporation, it is a pass-through entity. So any money that it makes automatically flows through to the owner as a distribution, which is different to a dividend. But basically, there's not going to be a dividend withholding tax simply because this US LLC is not paying dividends, it is paying distributions. And the third misconception is that there are no reporting requirements. You can just use this US LLC from abroad, and as long as you're not in the US, because you don't have to pay any taxes, you don't have to report anything. And this is also absolutely false. I know people actually who have run a US LLC from outside the US, and because they just use some shady agent to set it up very quickly for like $200, they don't tell the person that they actually have to file multiple forms every single year. And then later on, when they find out that they've been not filing these forms for like 2 years, they get fines, and the fines can go up very high. They can go up to $25,000 even for this one form here, for example, that you fail to fill. So the US LLC is a very great structure. It is a very easy and light structure to run from anywhere in the world, with the one caveat that you should absolutely fill all the correct forms and do it absolutely correctly, because if you don't do that, then this becomes a very expensive structure to run. And this is exactly why I use a professional agent who takes care of all this for me, who fills out all the forms, where I don't have to think about this. I don't have to know like, okay, if there's some new change this year, there's some new form that I have to fill, because these people are simply taking care of all of this for you. And they're also the same agents that set up my US LLC for me as well. The agent that I use is called Dula. They have been absolutely excellent for me. I even know the CEO personally. An excellent company. I highly recommend their services. What they will essentially do is that they will set up your US LLC for you if you're looking to set one up, and if you choose the correct plan, they will also take care of all the compliance for you, so that you don't have to think about filing forms. You can just focus on making money and running your business. Essentially, they have 3 different plans. They have the starter plan, which just involves everything to set up the business, to get your EIN, help you get your bank account, file the LLC with the state, and everything like this. But I would highly recommend you go for the total compliance plan, at least for the precise reason that I told you before, because if you fail to fill these forms, even one of these forms correctly, the fine is $25,000. So then the total cost of running this becomes $25,000. Sure, if you want to spend all that time to do it yourself, you can do that. But again, it's going to be better use of your time to simply focus on making money. So I would highly recommend you go for that plan for that reason. And if you also need bookkeeping for the business, which you most likely do, because while you don't have to do full bookkeeping for the US, you're most likely going to have to do bookkeeping for whatever country you live in, whatever country you run this company from. So for that reason, you might also want to go for the Total Compliance Max plan, which also includes a dedicated bookkeeper for your business. You literally have everything in one package. Now, Dula is the paid sponsor of this video. They've partnered for many videos on this channel before, mainly because I really respect the company. I use them myself, and I can absolutely wholeheartedly recommend them. And you can get 10% off if you use the first link down below in the description, if you use the code DULA at checkout. Again, the code is right here, and the link will be down below in the description. But with that said, there's some new changes / new things that have been happening that you should actually be aware of if you're looking to run a US LLC. The first thing is regarding payment processing. Now, many people, myself included, use the US LLC specifically to get access to US payment processing. But with Stripe, which is the most popular payment processing, there have been some instances where Stripe accounts have been blocked or something like that because Stripe doesn't accept or doesn't like certain kinds of businesses. And I would highly recommend you read through this Stripe prohibited and restricted businesses article over here. For example, if you run any kind of gambling services or anything like that, also crypto businesses, I've heard people having issues with this. So I would highly recommend you read through this and just keep that in mind. The second thing to keep in mind is that you should keep your accounts up to date at all times with your US LLC. I know so many people who just don't do any accounts, don't file forms anywhere. And so inadvertently, or these digital nomads just end up breaking laws for a long time. And sure, if they don't find out, then I mean, you're fine. But what about when they do? This is exactly, again, why you want to have a bookkeeper for your company. You want to keep your books up to date, and why you should go for the Total Compliance Max plan with Doula if you do use services, because it just includes the bookkeeper in the package itself. You don't need to start worrying about, okay, where am I going to find a US bookkeeper for my company and everything like that. And then on the reporting side of things, so I mentioned that you do have to file forms in the US, and there is one form that is recently new that if you have been, let's say, running the business for a couple of years, you might not even be aware of, and that is the beneficial owner report. It used to be the case that if you run this out of the US, then you don't have to report anything about who owns the company. So you have all of that privacy. Now, unfortunately, that is not quite the case anymore. You have this form called the beneficial ownership information form that every LLC owner has had to file since, I believe, 2023. Now, again, if you use Doula, they just send you an email like, hey, there's this form, and you don't even have to file the actual form. They just ask for the information that they need, and then they file the form on time with the IRS, so you don't have to worry about anything. But if you're doing this on your own, then this is what you need to be aware of. And you want to be aware of that you have this pro forma sort of tax form, and you need to file some financials but not full accounts. You have another form where you have to file details about any transactions between yourself and your company. So essentially between related parties to your US LLC, and a couple of other forms. You want to do the research to do all of that. Or if you use Doula, they will obviously do it for you. But this is just something to be aware of. So all in all, do I still believe that the US LLC is a great business structure? Yes, I do. There's not that many great options out there that give you this zero tax in the country where your company is registered with very light reporting. So those are the reasons why the US LLC is so attractive. And with all of this, you also get access to US banking and US payment processing. So generally the highest quality financial infrastructure out there. So I highly recommend it. Again, not for every situation, sort of depends on your situation. I have other videos on the channel. By the way, if you're specifically living in Dubai or the UAE and you're wondering, okay, should I set up a US LLC or a UAE company, or should I set up both, or what should I really do? Then I highly recommend you watch this video right here where I go over why I personally actually run a US LLC and a UAE company, and I explain all of this in detail so you know exactly what to do. So watch that video next, and I will see you in the next one.